Yo guys, it's Misha K. Today we're gonna look at SYREN, my new track out on FMR. If you haven't checked it out already, link will be in the description. We're gonna take a look at a lot of the processing, the production, the layers, the sounds, the ideas, and how it all comes together. So let's get started. So now we're in the project and we're gonna take a look at the drop first, which is made up of leads and chords. So let's listen to the drop really quick first. And both the lead and the bass in this track really follow one unifying rhythm. They actually came up in the shower with one day. And you'll hear it in all the sounds. Everything kind of just plays together. Now we're going to take a look at the leads. And let's listen to them first by themselves. So we go into the group here and we see these lower chords. And we have the top note. Pretty much the same patch, and the reason why I split them up was the original patch was a chord patch. So you have one MIDI note, but you get a chord out of it. And one of the notes, the top one, was way too loud, and I couldn't control it in the patch, so I split the MIDI up between two instances of the same plugin so I could fine-tune the volume of the top. Now let's look at that patch the way it sounded originally. Now you hear a difference right away. The chord is all wrong, and the notes are a lot longer. And there's a lot more delay. After changing all that, we had this. And let's look into the processing. So we have sausage fattener, fattening things up. We have some more saturation, dimension expander, making it a little bit bigger, and a lot of EQ here, because without EQ, very harsh, very nasal, ringing, and pretty muddy. So we're taking out the mud around 400, all the low end, taking a lot of the nasal stuff out of 1K and a ton of harshness and ringing sounds from 2K to 4K. After that, we just have some stock compressors and limiters and glue compressors, just tightening everything up. And after that, we go lower here, we see the snare channel here, playing the same rhythm as the chords. And this EQ is making a lot less punchy and bright than it used to. It sounded pretty good before, but it was so bright and punchy that it was clashing with everything else. So I just tamed it a bit with EQ, two EQs, mid-side EQ after the regular EQ, and it fit with everything a lot better. Then we have at the end Transient Shaper from Shack, a really great transient shaping plugin if you need to add some attack or curb some sustain of a sound. That could be a sample that you can't modify within a synth. Then we have this lower pluck. It's playing the fifth of the chord. We're in F sharp minor, so the C sharp is the fifth. It's adding to the tonal size and just making everything more filled out and bigger. Originally it sounded like this. Another chord patch again, so it's playing two notes and I only wanted one, so I messed with that, and then we have one note. And lastly, we have this really intense sound that comes in the second half of the drop here. It's actually a patch I made in SYREN. Simple super saw with a lot of detune, a lot of voices, and a pitch envelope that pitches down every time the note is played. In terms of processing, some saturation, some EQ, adding some brightness, and a little bit of cleanup and boosting in Pro Q. As for the lead channels, that's about it. But then we have some reverb that's being reversed, and the reverb comes from the tail of the leads. And you'll hear this some more here. And a big one that comes into the drop. Now I'll play a bit of that, just the reverb with the metronome, so you hear it in context. And that really ties everything together with the leads. Next, we'll talk about some effects and some sounds I added in the gaps to make it a lot more interesting. As I mentioned before, the drop MIDI has a lot of gaps and silences, and I wanted to fill them up with some interesting sounds just to spice things up. So the first one is this one. It's actually the same preset as this. But this time it has a lot more size, it's a lower octave, and it pitches down slower. Processing wise, the only thing I really did differently was add my favorite reverb, Valhalla Vintage. If we take off the reverb, it's obviously not as big. Then we have these grungy womps here that fill in the next gap. It's actually made up of two, one in the center and one on the sides. The center one sounds like this. It's a patch that I made in Massive. And we have stereo enhancer, just making things a little bit bigger, but still leaving it for the center. We have towel reverb, adding a lot of size, EQ a little bit, no trash, I didn't want it too powerful. Then on the sides we have this sound. It's a little lacking, especially with the scoops that I did here in the EQ, but again I wanted it to complement the center growling sound and not clash with it. Some saturation, no trash. We boosted a lot in the EQs here, and tail bit crusher, just adding a little bit of bite here. Then we have this last one. Nothing special here, just a sample, and bit crusher again, and some added sidechain because it's playing with the kick at the same time. Here. And I didn't want it clashing, obviously, so we have a lot of extra sidechain there. And now we can listen to all of these sounds with the lead, and you'll hear how it all comes together. And as for the fill-in sounds, tying everything together, that's it. And next we're going to look at the bass. Now we're going to take a look at the bass here. Let's listen to the bass with everything else except the leads now. You'll hear that I have this bass group here that comes out of the build-up. I kind of wanted to emulate a car engine revving. I thought it would be really cool to have in this track. So that's actually one of the patches that I'm going to show you next in the bass group. But here it is with reverb, pitch automation, etc. And it goes into this rock riff that goes into the bass. So let's take a look at the bass group here. First we have this sound. The final version just has a little bit of EQ, some cleaning up. The original version started out in Massive. And if we take off the processing, it's kind of dull, right? So I added Trash, does a lot of work. Trash is one of my favorite plugins. It adds a ton of character. After that, SYREN for some more saturation. And since I'm doing a lot of distortion and saturation, things can get really harsh and really muddy. So I had to fix it with some mid-side EQ here. On the sides, we're taking out the lows, some of the highs, the mids. We're taking out the highs and all the harshness so it can fit better with the kick and everything else. And obviously some lows to make room for the sub later. Faturator is doing nothing. And Bit Crusher just for some extra crunch. So after that we have the exact same layer but without trash this time, so it kind of fits in the middle and it's a lot smoother. Processing wise, nothing really different except no trash, but we keep the saturation, and BX Digital is just doing some mono maker in the middle, so we're taking everything below a certain frequency that I think is too muddy and just making it mono so it's a little tighter. Next we have a really cool sound that actually started as a sample of an electric bass. Take off all the processing, it sounds totally different. Not very bright, really muddy, and too bassy. So we're boosting a lot here in the mids and this area to get it really bright. Guitar rig is just adding some warmth and size, so we turn that off. Still has the same character, but not the same size and warmth, so we turn that back on. It's doing a lot of warmth and reverb. We're boosting again here. Trash is making it just a little bit dirtier. And BX Digital is doing the same thing. and ton of EQ here, because after trash, as I said before, things get really harsh. So we take off Pro Q here. Very harsh and kind of unpleasant, especially if I wanted to mesh with everything else in the mix. So we're cutting a lot of harshness in 2K here. And compressor just tightening everything up. After that, I have this sliding sub here that slides up and down every time there's a gap or silence in the MIDI, which happens a lot, and I'll cover that later too. So if we take one of the layers from before, and with the sliding sub, you'll hear what's happening. I don't know if you can hear it for wherever you're listening, but if you have headphones or monitors, you'll hear it. Without the EQ, it's pretty good, but a little bit too much highs to mix with everything else. So we make it a lot smoother, take off the highs here. Same with all this. Taking out some really annoying notes. Same there. Utility doing nothing. Oh, width, making it totally mono here. Kickstart for some extra sidechain. We don't want it to get too muddy here. And the sub bass. I don't have the original version, but I think I basically did the same thing with the sub. I had some trash and some saturation, and then I put R bass from Waves. It really adds some extra bass harmonics, and it makes the sub really powerful. So that's pretty much it for the bass. And then I have a couple of bass reverbs that lead into parts of the drops, just to connect things, just like the lead reverbs we had before. So we hear that coming into the drop. So listen to all these layers again that we just covered. And for the bass, that's pretty much it. Let's listen to the bass and the kick just by itself. So it's a really driving force of this track. So that plus the leads, and we have everything together now. So that pretty much covers the main part of the drop, the leads and the bass, on all the little extra effects. Next we'll cover some cool tonal effects I added to the drop to make it a lot more intense in the second half. Now we're going to talk a bit about the effects that I added in the drop to make it more interesting and intense. So first off, we have this sound that you might not notice in the mix, but you'll definitely notice if it's gone. Basically, it's just a droning saw that's holding on the tonic note. It's holding an F sharp. It reinforces the key, adds space and size. Basically, what made it interesting in the original channel was EOS reverb, a really great reverb I like when I'm looking for something really epic and atmospheric and not worrying about it sounding realistic. Then I had it auto panning left to right, oscillating with some stock auto pan from Ableton. Next up, we have this sound that's holding again, but pitching a little bit too. And I think it started as a Super Saw in Nexus. Then we have Gorgon, a really great plugin, making it sound really messy and big. It's kind of like trash, but it's a lot trashier, so you really have to be careful with it. I think the dry wet was just like 1% there. Then a lot of EQ, fixing what Gorgon did, but still keeping what I liked about Gorgon. Some more EQ, taking a bit of the brightness away. Reverb, big wet plate here. Some more sidechain, making it even cleaner, and some automations that I have no idea what they're doing, but it sounds good, so I'll just leave it. And what else do we have? And lastly, we have this very rhythmic saw that plays, and you'll hear it now. The original sound is here. A lot of EQ. I think it had Gorgon also, therefore we have a ton of cleanup EQ. Faturator, we have sausage fattener again. EQ here, let's see what it's doing. Just boosting here, cleaning up the lows, taking away some brightness. Saturation knob, really great free plugin actually. Vintage reverb again, some extra kickstart. And the way I got the automation with the pitch is that, you'll take a look here, I have it pitching up and then down. So overall it's going up, but it's at the end of each bar it's pitching down, so you'll see that here. And together, and lastly, an important part of this little fill is this piano that you're probably wondering about. And it started out like this, and let's take a look at the processing. Semi-Q fixing up the lows, Trash doing a lot of work. If we take off Trash, you know, it sounds really dull like your everyday piano, but with Trash, some tuning here and there, sounds really epic. And we have some Bit Crusher, some EQ, taking away some really harsh notes that I had here. Usually the same old culprits. We have some muddiness in the 422 area, we have some nasalness here, and harshness around 2K and 4K, almost 5K. So, and obviously my baby here, adding just a little bit of reverb. And that's pretty much it, and some more cleaning up here. Now we're looking at the vocals. These kind of vocals are pretty much a game of chance. You're throwing in acapellas, vocal one-shots into samplers, chopping them up, rearranging, hoping for something fresh. And eventually I had this. In the intro I also have vocals, but it's being introduced slowly piece by piece with some cool vocal effects. Basically I have the reverb tails of each vocal shot reversed, and they're just panning left to right with tons of reverb and filter. And as we go along here, more and more of the vocals come through. And around bar 17 they open up completely while the piano starts to creep in. And then, after the vocals stop at bar 25, the pianos come in full force, reinforcing the drop rhythm, getting everyone ready. Now we move along to the main big breakdown after the first drop, and we hear the vocals coming in with the same kind of reverse effects as we had in the intro. And now with new instruments. And when the kick drum comes in and all the breakdown instruments come in, the full vocal hook is heard too. And that's how the vocals play into the second breakdown. And now we've come to the main breakdown where the vocal really shines with everything else. So let's listen to some of these break elements without the vocals. As you hear, we have a lot of chords, those are the pianos, and then we have a kind of lead and bass situation. So let's listen to the latter first. So if we look at the bass here, we have this nice plucky, slappy bass. And we have the usual Trash, SYREN, and also Virtual Mix Rack from Slate, a really great plugin that's just doing some high-end EQ boosting and some compression. And we have Pro Q here just fixing a little bit of the overly harmonic low end that was added by Trash just to tighten things up. Then we have this top layer here, just adding a little bit of punch and bite to the sub. They work really well together. And we have some low end taken out so the sub can really shine through, and the same kind of Trash, SYREN kind of business going on with some new reverb added also, and then some low cuts in the EQ again. Then we move on to the leads. We have this lead right here. It's a nice buzzy lead with some vibrato. It's one of the only channels in the track that basically had almost no processing, just some low cut. Then we have this one I really like. If we take a look at that, Nothing really special going on here, except Valhalla Vintage is doing most of the work making it special. Sounds really small without it and really big with it. Then we have BX Digital just doing some mono maker again. And lastly, in this little group here, we have this cool vocal filter ARP going on. I think it was a preset in Omnisphere. It always crashes for me, a lot of resources, so I froze that ages ago. We have a lot of low cut here, a lot of reverb, and we cut out a lot of the middle EQ here to make room for everything else. Next we have a lot of these chords we're going to look at. So we heard the bass and the lead in the breakdown, and now we have some more chords here. First we have this reverb piano that I really love to use, thanks to EOS. It already has some reverb in it, but EOS just takes it to another level, makes it really epic sounding. Then we have this organ from Anna. It's really wide and just really fills up the sound a bit with the following pianos. So we have these pianos on the sides first. Really classic house sound. We have OTT, really great plugin, just making it a little bit punchier and grittier. Saturation knob, as I showed you before. EQ, taking a lot out of the high end. Some harshness in 4K. Some nasal areas in the middle here, and some weird harmonics around 374. And some bit crusher, adding some bite. Then we have this piano here, it's a Nexus piano. Oh, hey Steve! Aoki always pops up when I open Nexus. Same old stuff here, OTT, some mid-side EQ, bit crusher. Then we go to this Giant from Contact, a really great piano. With Contact, a lot of the patches are really hard to tame in terms of sustain, and if you want to really shorten notes. Some of them are just really long even if you make short MIDI notes. So I tend to flatten it and then work on shortening the notes with Transient Master, really great plugin. Then we have Vintage Reverb again, OTT as always, and a lot of EQ again. There were a lot of harmonics here. I boosted here, I cleaned up here and in the middle, and added some more shine in 10K area. And bit crusher, as always. Then we have this lead, a massive lead I think. Is it massive? Yes. And sausage fattener, some EQ cleaning things up. This EQ does nothing, but I'll just leave it there. Vintage Valhalla again, some mid-side EQ. What do we have here? Just cleaning up some harshness and some overly bright areas in the EQ here. Then we have a saw here. Really big saw here. Really great plugin here is Up Stereo. Really makes things a lot wider, but you have to be careful. It distorts a lot, so you have to turn down the volume after, and also turn down the input before. Let's look at these EQs. We have a lot of harsh fixes around here. If we listen to these, it's really harsh. They're really buzzy, annoying sounds. It's not like metallic harshness, so I had to take that out. Taking out overly bright areas in the top. Another EQ with a lot more surgical cuts. Just taming the sound. Then we have this reverb layer here. Another plugin I rarely use, but I really love it. It's called Simplant. Just kind of going above everything and adding like a really atmospheric quality. And then in the build-up, these pianos come back. Really preparing the listener for the build-up again. So now let's take a quick listen to the break stuff again with the kick and the bass, but no vocals. And if we add the kick there, without the vocals, it sounds like this. We add the vocals back in. And then we come back to the build-up and the drop comes yet again. And now we're at the second drop. This one's bigger and badder than the first. Everything comes in together, all the elements at once. And that same siren takes us out to the outro. And phrase by phrase here in the outro, all the elements are slowly dying away until we have really nothing. And everything fades away smoothly and the track just kind of wraps itself up with this mysterious vibe. So at this point I think we've covered everything. We have the breakdown instruments, the vocals, the leads, the bass, and the effects. Everything that came together to make this track. I hope you've enjoyed our little quick walkthrough we've done here. If you have any more questions on the production side of things, feel free to drop some questions in the comments. As always, it's been a pleasure. Ciao.